Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Sentinel Tactics, the Flame of Freedom from Greater Than Games. Now, this is a tactical skirmish game set in the Sentinels of the Multiverse universe. Sentinels of the Multiverse is one of my top 10 games of all time, probably. I think it'll still be at least in the top 20 the next time I reevaluate my list, because this is a fantastic cooperative card game with a wonderful cooperative element to it. Some terrible artwork, but it's a testament to the game itself that it's so wonderful that I look past those aesthetic elements that really displease me and the rest of my group. And, you know, Greater Than Games is currently 1-1 with me. They have the great Sentinels of the Multiverse and the really not so great Galactic Strike Force, which had the same sort of cooperative element, but in a spaceship, far future sci-fi, everyone takes control of spaceships instead of superhero type setting, which is a fantastic idea with deck building elements, but a horrible execution. So I was had a little trepidation going into Sentinel Tactics, but I had hope that the theme would pull through. So you have the same characters from the Sentinels of the Multiverse game going through different scenarios, trying to most of the scenarios, or all the scenarios in the booklets included in the game, are one versus all. One player is the villain, the other players are the superheroes. You choose them however you like, and then you go through different scenarios with different hexes and different mission objectives. Everyone has cards with powers, but it's not having a deck of cards. It's about selectively choosing the cards that you want, hence the tactics in the title, and trying to meet whatever your goal is, whether you're the good guy trying to stop the villain or the villain trying to complete his or her nefarious plan. Did it work for me and my group? Let's go ahead and take a brief look at how the game is played, and we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. Alright folks, I'm just going to give you a very brief overview of Sentinel Tactics. This is a competitive or semi-cooperative game for 2 to 8 players, where you take control of the superheroes or supervillains of the Sentinels of the Multiverse universe. So this is related to the Sentinels of the Multiverse card game, the original game. One thing I should point out right away is that you can actually buy miniatures for this game, whereas the base set only comes with little tokens to represent all the different heroes and villains and their sidekicks and henchmen, as it were. Also, there are several different ways to play this game. You can play it as a free-for-all skirmish where everyone takes control of a hero or villain and just fights it out, last man or woman left standing. You can do a team game where you play in teams, even numbered teams, trying to see which one comes out on top. Or you can play in one versus all mode, which usually has to do with scenarios. So one player takes control of, say, a supervillain. The rest of the players are heroes trying to stop that villain's plan. And the game provides several scenario booklets, one for each of the villains that's in this set, like Baron Blade and Omnitron and Citizen Dawn. So you can do it however you want. I actually set this up based on Baron Blade's first scenario in his book. So this is a typical setup. Now this map is the Megalopolis map, which is like the big metropolis type city in the world. This is all a bunch of cliched superhero tropes. But on the other side of this, here I'll show you, there's actually Insula Primalis, which is a like Savage Lands type place. Although I guess they can't say that because they'll get sued. But this is a typical setup for how the board would look like in any case. You'll use some different tiles, some you won't use. Mostly you'll use, there's not a ton of, this is like all the tiles that are in the game. So you'll usually use all or most of them. The important feature, most of the tiles are exactly the same, but the important feature are the little dots, which I'm not sure if you saw when I was holding it up. There's little dots here, and those indicate elevation. So whenever you're trying, like 1 is base elevation, and if you're trying to go above or below, let's say you're trying to get up to base of elevation or 2, it's going to cost you extra movement, like 1 extra movement. If you try to go down, it also costs you extra movement as well, unless you have mobility, which means you're either flying, or you're really fast, or you're like grappling over different buildings. So you'll choose, for this scenario, you have Baron Blade versus Hero. So the 2 heroes I chose are Tachyon or Absolute Zero, which are 2 of my favorites, but there's a lot of other heroes that come in the game. You have Ra, the god of the sun. Focus that a bit. You have Wraith, the Wraith. You have the indestructible Bunker, who's like Iron Man. You have America's Finest Legacy. Then you have the villains, of course. You have Citizen Dawn. You have Omnitron 5. Here is the Omni Reapers, like an improved version of Omnitron. And then there's all kinds of other things. There's environmental cards. There's a lot of cards that are like henchmen for the other villains, like the assault drone here for Omnitron. You have a lot of different citizen cards for Citizen Dawn, like Citizen Spring here, all with their own stats. There's terrain and different effects, like the living force field generator for Baron Blade. There's the Tyrannosaurus Rex, which is always fun. The monorail train, which you'll use in some city maps. And lots of other different things like that. And every character is going to have their own set of power cards and their own some tokens associated with them as well. So, for instance, there's some tokens for Absolute Zero, which are ice. There's other ones which are lava pools. There's energy shards like these here. There's all types of different things you use depending on what scenario and what setup you're using, and you can freely make your own scenarios as well. So once you have your character card, you'll also take these little health tokens indicating how much health you have left. There's a bunch of different dice in the game, although they're all D6s or just different colored to keep them separate. And then you'll have your power cards, and the game is going to begin. Now, at the beginning of the game and at the end of every subsequent round, the first thing you're going to do is roll your movement. Every hero has a movement number, which tells you how many dice they roll for movement, and then it's going to have an arrow pointing up, down, or sideways. If it's up, you're going to take the highest die roll of the dice you roll for movement, and that's your movement value for the turn, how many hexes you can move. If it's down, you take the lowest. If it's middle, you're going to take the balance of the two, or whatever number is the most even. So you'll have your movement at the beginning of the round. Like I said, you'll roll at the end. And first, you have the power-up phase. Now, the power-up phase is where you're going to take you have your entire deck of power cards available to you right away. And out of those cards, you're going to choose 2 of them, at least at the most 2, but you could do 1 as well, that you're going to put down in front of you. And these are your powers for the round. So, for instance, for Tachyon here, I chose the World Stands Still. Whenever you see one of these like little energy symbols, that means these are always on. So her move value increases by 1, and she has mobility, which means she can like run up buildings. She ignores elevation. Her other one I chose, however, requires that she spends health to use it as an action. Tachyon's next attack this turn rolls dice equal to her move value instead of the printed attack dice. Now it's important not just that she has to spend she doesn't have to spend an action for that, she just has to spend health. But some of them require that you spend actions. So, for instance, Baron Blades here has got this fist symbol. That means it has to use one of his actions. You only have a certain amount of actions on your card. Like Tachyon has 3, Baron Blade has 3, but Absolute Zero over there only has 2. Now, a lot of these are attacks. And for attacks, you're just going to roll dice the same as you do for almost everything else, but you only hit on certain numbers. Those are the bold numbers here. So, for this attack, the Fission Blaster, Baron Blade only misses on a 1. But it's not as simple as that. Even if you roll a bunch of successes on dice, your opponent gets to roll their defense value, which in this case for Tachyon is a 3. So if that attack was coming at Tachyon, she'd get to roll dice, and every die that came up as a number equal to or greater than one of the successful dice for Baron Blade, she would get to cancel that out. You also have to worry about range, which I have to tell you is one of the most annoying things in this game trying to figure out. But essentially you count all the spaces between you and your opponent when you're trying to make a ranged attack, and most attacks are ranged. It has to say melee in order for it to not be ranged, but you'll count all those spaces, and any die that is lower than that range is canceled out before you even start doing attack and defense, which is a little bit weird, but it kind of works out. Some attacks have reach, which make that better. On your turn, so you'll go through the power up where you use your powers. I'm kind of jumping all over the place. Sorry. You have Surge, the Surge part of your round, which is just where if you one of your cards tells you that a Surge effect happens, you'll do it right away. Then you go into the go time where you actually take your actions. Now in this scenario, Baron Blade is trying to go around and pick up these tokens, which represent like devices he's going to use to blow up the Freedom Tower. So on your turn, you can use actions to move, which just means you'll move whatever value you rolled for the turn. You can sprint, which you can only do each action once unless it says otherwise, unless you have a special ability that says otherwise. But you can move and you can sprint if you want, which is you get to move 2 spaces and ignore elevation, which can sometimes be a serious issue. You can also choose to aim and dodge. Now, there's a lot of tokens in this game, which you'll take as like bonuses or penalties. If you choose to aim, before you roll an attack roll, you can decide to you can spend an aim token and have every single roll that you rolled, die that you rolled, equal the highest number that you rolled. So if you rolled a bunch of dice and your highest number was 5, if you spent an aim token beforehand, you can make them all into 5. Dodge, on the other hand, does the same thing except for when you're rolling defense. You also have attack +1, defense +1, and attack -1 and defense -1 tokens, which are going to have you rolling more or less dice for those attacks. But you spend those, if they're +1s, you get to spend those after you roll the dice, in which case you'll get to roll another die and see what happens. So you're going to go around taking your actions, making your attacks against your opponents, trying to, in this case, stop Baron Blade, or if you're Baron Blade, you're trying to pick up these tokens and potentially win by blowing up Freedom Tower. Once everyone gets done taking all their actions that they're allowed to or that they want to take, then you go to the to be continued part where you're going to roll your movement for the next round, activate any hazard spaces, and then you start all over again. You go to the next power-up round, at which point you can swap out one of the power cards that you have if you want to and put in a new one. And that's really just a very brief summary of the game. You're moving around trying to attack your opponents. If you're the villain, you're trying to meet certain goals and objectives. Sometimes there's a time limit. You have these turn tokens here, which are a very convenient way to figure out whose turn it is, who's already taken their turn. In this scenario, because it's a one versus all, the one actually gets more turns than the other players. One thing I should mention is that you can get incapacitated in this game. Whenever you take damage, you have to remove one of these health tokens. But being incapacitated doesn't really mean that you're out of the game. You just lose your next action phase, in which case you get up, you respawn, you lose one of your... You had to take back your power cards, but you get to put one back down, and then on your next turn you'll get to resume as if nothing ever happened. And that's really it. That's just a very, very brief summary of Sentinel Tactics. Now let's get back to my final thoughts. Well, I'm very happy to report that Sentinel Tactics, The Flame of Freedom, is a solid game. We had a lot of fun with it. It has some quirks and some issues that keep it from being a great game, and it's definitely not nearly as good as the original Sentinels of the Multiverse card game, but it's still a lot of fun. Let's start with the theme, components, and artwork. Well, let's just start with the artwork because you know what I'm going to say. It's still terrible. It looks more polished than previous artwork used for Greater Than Games, because the same art was used for both Sentinels of the Multiverse and Galactic Strike Force as well, but it's still very, very bad. I actually had the thought when I first played it that if you walk into a Michael's craft store, in the front of the store, there's a rack with a bunch of how to draw books, and there's always like how to draw manga and how to draw anime books that looks terrible and looks definitely like it's an American who doesn't really know how to draw anime or manga very well, was never trained that way, who did all the artwork for it. That's what this reminds me of, for sure. And it's just not good, but to each their own. But putting that aside, the graphic design is fine. The tiles are okay. They went an interesting direction in making the actual terrain on the tiles like sort of muted and washed out, kind of like in the background of the tile. It doesn't distract too much, but it was kind of a weird choice, and I think it was because they didn't want the dots representing elevation to get mixed in too much, but I would have appreciated if the tiles looked a little bit better. But I do like the dot system, and I don't think it gets too cluttered. It's very easy to see how elevation works out, which is not always the case in these types of games, so I do appreciate that. All the cards are very neatly laid out as far as the text and how things work and the numbers. The rule book is okay. You really need to play this a couple of times before you understand some of the smaller things about how range works. That's not laid out nearly as well as I would have liked, but once you get it, it's fine. Although I still don't like the oversized like 12 by 12 rule books that people are putting out nowadays, especially Greater Than Games is apparently their new thing. I don't see the need for it. But anyways, that's fine. Presentation is okay. As far as the gameplay, I don't like to use the phrase beer and pretzels game that much because I think it's overused. I think a lot of people use beer and pretzels game when they don't want to say a game is bad. So it's like a euphemism for this game is kind of bad, but you can have some amount of fun with it. Well, I would legitimately say that Sentinel Tactics is a beer and pretzels game, but in a good way. In that, it's mostly just, once you get the little I'm not using that word correctly, but once you get the small rules, the little weird rules worked out as far as range works and how the bonuses work and all that different stuff, which can be tough the first time, after that, it's a pretty simple game. It's really just about running up and hitting something as hard as you can until it stops moving. And that's pretty much it. And it feels like a video game because even when you incapacitate someone, they just respawn. And all you've made them do is lose a turn. And all this is done pretty simply. You have all your power cards available to you right off the bat, whether you're playing a hero or a villain. But if you're playing villains and scenarios, you have some extra powers. It can get a little more complicated. But if you're just doing like a team game or a skirmish game, it's very simple. I mean, you decide what powers you have. You're never going to have more than 2 powers, and you are never going to have more than like 3, maybe 4 actions, depending on which character you're using and what powers you're using. So there's not a ton to keep track of. And it's just very simple and straightforward. And what I like the most is the same thing I liked about Sentinels of the Multiverse, is that every character is different and makes you feel different. It makes you feel like you have different powers. Tachyon is zipping around the map at full speed and getting all these extra actions, and Bunker is just, bunking down and like shooting artillery, and it's really, really powerful. But he's very, very slow. And Freedom, or was it Legacy? I always get his name wrong because it's such a lame name. But Legacy is all about buffing his comrades, just like in the original game, and helping them out and like taking a lot of hits. And the Wraith is all about ranged attacks and projectiles. So all of that is really, really cool. And Baron Blade, even like the villains are the same. Baron Blade has like teleportation gadgets, stuff like that. So that's the best part about this, and it really makes you feel like a superhero. The same reason why I think Sentinels of the Multiverse, the original, is the most thematic superhero game that I've played, and therefore possibly the best. So that really did come through here. But I do not like the finicky rules aspect. I think you kind of need to, especially how the rules laid out, I think you kind of need to just massage over some rules if you want to have the most simple enjoyment out of this. I think 3 players is probably the best amount of players for this, because it keeps it from dragging on too long, and it keeps the downtime and turns from going on too long, especially if you're doing scenarios. Now, if you're doing team game, obviously you want 2-on-2, I think would probably be the best, or even 3-on-3, because at least if you're having downtime, then at least your team members are going. But if you're doing scenario games, I think the lower number of players is definitely better, or else you're sitting there like, where one person, or the villain character, is taking like 4 or 5 turns, which is not that fun. So that's something to keep in mind. And one thing that kind of bums me out is because of how long downtime between turns can be, is that being incapacitated can be very, very brutal. I wish that even if you have to start all the way back on the other side of the map, I wish that respawning was automatic. Maybe take some sort of penalty that didn't involve you being completely knocked out of gameplay. I understand that you get knocked out, you should be penalized, but for this type of game, which is supposed to be very fast and supposed to keep you engaged the whole time, having to lose a whole turn is really, really a bummer if you've not acted for that round. So if you've acted for the round, it's fine, but if you haven't acted yet and you get knocked out, which if you're playing a scenario, the villain is going to try to knock you out as quickly as possible, it can be a real bummer just sitting there waiting forever. So something to keep in mind. So there's some finicky bits to the game that I think really hold it back from being like truly phenomenal, but there are some real fun to be had as well. Using all your powers, being able to swap them out tactically, hence the name, I think really comes across well, and the theme is solid. So I do recommend playing it as, I wouldn't recommend a free-for-all. It's not really made for that, but team games are fun. The scenarios are fun if you have a low amount of players. And all in all, it's a solid game. I would recommend it to people who like the theme of the original Sentinels of the Multiverse. Maybe didn't like the card play as much, because some people just don't like card games that much. But this might be more up their alley. I don't think the game needs the miniatures you can buy separately, but if you want to do it, go right ahead. And there's an expansion out there too that you might have a lot of fun with. So, good game. I think that Greater Than Games should definitely branch out and do other properties. They don't always need to do Sentinels, but they should take some cues from what they've done with both Sentinels games before they make another game like Galactic Strike Force. Keep it simple, keep it to the point, keep the theme strong, and keep the fiddliness to a minimum. Despite all the tokens that come to Sentinel Tactics, it's not all that fiddly, which is to its opposite of detriment. I don't know. I'm struggling for the word right now. To its benefit. That's what it is. Sentinel Tactics, The Flame of Freedom. Good game. My name is Nick. This has been Board Game Brawl, and I'm reminding you to get out there and game every day and in every way. Take care.